Hello everyone and welcome back to Nathrandir's Guide to Everything. Today we're going to be discussing the world of Arcane and I guess the League of Legends universe as a whole, and why I think that will make such a great tabletop RPG campaign or adventure setting. Right at the top, this video will contain spoilers for Arcane Seasons 1 and 2, so if you haven't seen those yet, go and watch them. And what are you doing? Go and watch it! First up, let's just talk about the setting. Like, number one on this list of why it's such a great campaign setting is just where it's set. Piltover and Zorn, and that kind of duality between the two sides of a coin, basically. The story of Arcane, as we know, centers around the gleaming city of progress known as Piltover, while also showing you kind of the polluted, chaotic underbelly of that known as Zorn. Straight away, just the dichotomy between those two things is just great for a setting already. If you talk about it with your player characters, they could be all from one side of that or a mixed bag from either or, depending on, I guess, where you want to pick up your campaign in the wider world of Arcane. An adventure or a quest or a campaign set in Piltover offers political intrigue, high society drama. A couple of your player characters could be from one of the influential families, perhaps, like the Kinnemans, for example, perhaps related to Caitlyn in some way, something like that. Obviously, above Zorn as well in Piltover, we have the power of Hextech kind of backing it and pushing it forwards. That's why it is known as the City of Progress. Above ground in Piltover, players would have the opportunity to interact with powerful enforcers, influential merchants, and ambitious inventors within the city. Not to say, though, by contrast, that Zorn doesn't have any of those things in itself, just I guess it'd be a slightly different spin on those things. So Zorn itself, I guess, is like a dystopian sprawl of crime, poverty, rebellion. There's a lot of kind of mature themes around that you could explore for sure as well if your player characters are either heading down there or from there, perhaps. A campaign set there would allow your players to explore gang rivalries, perhaps, as we see that there's a lot of like political intrigue down there too, but in a different way to how it is in Piltover itself. You could explore the ethics of experimentation, and that's where it's kind of the duality to the gleaming inventors of progress in Piltover to the characters like Singed, who we see likes to experiment with Shimmer and so on. The contrast between those two things already makes for a bunch of story hooks and opportunities for the players to engage with, or they can kind of navigate that grey area in between. Obviously, there's a lot of that within the show itself. It shows the positives and negatives to both sides. You could definitely explore that as well as you are exploring the world with your players. I guess I'm pitching this as a view from a DM perspective of I'm actually really looking forward to trying this. While creating this video, while scripting this video, I have found myself wanting to play this even more using Dungeons & Dragons or whatever the system really, but it would work for anything. Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, is it Blades in the Dark, anything really. Daggerheart, for example, which is something I really want to try out from the creators of Critical Role and Darrington Press. I think that's the route I'm going to go down, just because I know that Daggerheart has been designed in a way where any fantasy setting should work, really. I'm rambling anyway, we're getting ahead on the points here. Number two, I've popped in that there is already existing complex factions and characters within the world for you to draw from as a DM. And if you're a player watching this, you could get inspiration for your player characters too. The Council of Piltover, for example, kind of represents order and control, but also hubris and corruption. They don't really know what they've got. They don't really see the other side of it until the latter parts of season 2 and the consequences of their actions, basically, when Zorn kind of does rise up, when Jinx takes that first step. We know that the gangs below Zorn, which we kind of mentioned a little bit already, like Silco's forces across season 1, thrive on chaos, violence, rebellion. So you could definitely do, like, I guess, a bit of a darker campaign if it was all set down in Zorn, which is vying for control amongst the streets there. There is also something to be said for a faction of inventors like Jace and Victor, who seem to operate a little bit outside of both of those things, especially within the themes of the story. They push the boundaries of science, often with consequences, as we now know across the 2 seasons. I think the diversity here allows players to explore morality, definitely, depending on kind of which sides they choose. How far are they willing to go to get what they want? The best example I can kind of compare it to, I think, in Dungeons & Dragons, for example, which a lot of people know, is like the Waterdeep Dragon Heist campaign, which is entirely set in one large city. So you could take a lot of inspiration from something like that, reading that book, which I have actually not read all the way through. Maybe that's part of my journey to designing Piltover for tabletop RPGs. I'll maybe have to give that a read, but I know that the level of detail in that is so good, as that's kind of the play area is the city for the majority of the campaign. Number 3 is the kind of themed mechanics and I guess the technology of the world of Arcane. So with the introduction of like Shimmer, which is kind of the darker alternative to Hextech, the drug-induced superhuman abilities basically, along with Hextech, which is a bit more, I would say, maybe traditional fantasy. What would it be? It's like a magical technological hybrid, right? So both of those things are an easy way to explain away any abilities your character might have. You can very easily just integrate that with your player characters and NPCs that exist in the world. Obviously, lots of these games have characters can have very grand and impactful powers, but you could, I think, very easily explain what that might look like. Like, for example, I don't know, a Dungeons and Dragons fireball might just be a thrown. I forget what they're actually called in the show. The little Hextech balls. I'll probably put something on screen as to what they're actually called. I've completely forgotten. But more inspiration comes from just this as well. Perhaps depending on the timeline, again, where it was set, I guess this really depends how you want to run the game. Like we see at the start of Arcane Season 1, when the party that you see, Vi, Powder and companions, actually are going to steal something from Piltover, and they are from Zorn. You know, they're down from the streets down there from the darker side of things. And that's where the whole story kicks off, when they find the Hextech. So there's a lot of mission opportunities there for stealing perhaps Hextech inventions, or from the other side of it, trying to put a stop to Shimmer usage if you're going from like an enforcer standpoint, perhaps. I think obviously you see a lot of positives around Hextech within the show, but eventually leading to a negative and kind of what it leads to connotations wise. I'll try not to spoil anything unless I don't have to. Shimmer, though, is definitely a darker alternative to that, almost a Warlock Pact-esque, because yes, it offers superhuman abilities, but we see it in the show that a lot of it has a cost to the user of those. I think both of those things combined open up a lot for tabletop RPG mechanics to thrive, including like resource management, homebrewing items. You could obviously just invent anything you'd like. If you want to throw the Hextech gauntlets in, I've actually already done a video on this. You can find it if you search the homebrew on D&D Beyond for bracket, NGTE bracket. I've made a bunch of items. One of them is the Hextech gauntlets. Number 4 is that there is already a cast within the show for players to draw from, a cast of like relatable archetypes, protagonists and antagonists. So it's really easy for that to resonate with players. I know everyone has a favorite character, right? I imagine when they're making their own, if they're struggling for a bit of inspiration, maybe they don't know the world, maybe they haven't seen the show, but they'll just do one Google, they'll see artwork of Vi and Jinx. Now, but you can easily pop those characters into particular categories. Like, for example, Vi is the street smart brawler fighting for justice, right? She is a fighter at the end of the day. We have Caitlyn, who is like a highborn, I guess like privileged character, but has also become an enforcer. So he's on that kind of the law side of things. So where does she fit into society? That's an easy character to just make your own, for sure. Not that you would play Caitlyn, but you understand what I'm saying. We have Jinx, very chaotic, a bit of a wild card, a character struggling with trauma, and we know, I mean, it's pretty much tropey at this point that characters are often made with trauma in tabletop RPG settings and fantasy settings. Or someone like Jace or Victor, who is just a visionary, essentially. They are scientists, and how far will they go to push technology forwards, push their methods forwards, push the magic of the world forwards. So I feel like players will take a lot of inspiration from the NPCs around them that have similar struggles and motivations, which is why I think quite a contained campaign within Piltover and Zorn, there's plenty you can do there. You know, we only see a fraction of each side of the city, really. You could just make it up as you go along, and that's why, again, this is a perfect setting for a tabletop RPG. Number 5, I think, just talking about the setting as a whole, I think the moral ambiguity between the two things, we've touched on this already as well. I think one of the strengths of the show is that you do see both sides of the story. So, you know, we see Zorn's expense when Piltover continues to advance and push this Hextech technology further forwards. We see the direct results of what we're doing there. Yes, Piltover becomes an even greater city when the Hex Gates are introduced, but at what cost to Zorn. We also see the other side of this is where the kind of morale, complexity comes into it a little bit, because we see it from the Zornite side of things, from Vi and Jinx. And while those characters are ruthless and often come across as, I guess you might say, evil in some capacity, definitely Jinx more so than Vi. I think Vi has a better attitude on how to fix things, though. That's kind of her character arc, I guess you could say. But the Zornites, those people believe their cause is just, right? They are being, it feels like, stamped down into the earth, lower and lower and lower, while Piltover continues to progress and become more prosperous. And then there's again the kind of marriage between Hextech, which promises progress, but you risk destruction of everything, as we see towards the end of Arcane Season 2 and what Hextech ultimately led to, as well as then Shimmer on the other side of it, which grants you power, but at a very high price to your often physical and mental state for those characters. Something really, really cool to explore for NPCs and player-driven storytelling too. Obviously, this would all come together. You definitely talk with your players about how far they want to take these things. I think, again, Arcane is just the perfect, there's no clear right or wrong across it. As evil as Jinx gets in her most awful moments, you still feel a sympathy there, and that's why she's such a great villain. So number 6 is the opportunity for diverse playstyles. We kind of touched on this with the archetypal characters, like Vi is a brawler, Jinx is a bit chaotic, a bit evil, uses magic, you could say, or guns basically, and then we have Caitlyn, who is a paragon of good, it might be, but not quite sure where she fits in. There is an opportunity for a bunch of play styles here and a bunch of campaign types too. You could go very combat heavy, do a lot of street brawls, like sabotage, mission type things and stealing things, or large scale battles. We saw larger scale battles in Season 2 for sure. You could also go with a bit more of like mystery and investigation instead, kind of a bit more low key, uncover conspiracies, perhaps politically, or within Piltover's elite, or with Zorn's gangs down below, depending on which kind of route you want to go about it. Additionally, I think there's something to be said for like exploration and discovery as well. There's a lot of the region that we kind of don't know. I haven't even Googled to see if there's a map of Piltover and Zorn kind of detailing all the areas, but that's something I'll get to, I'm sure. What does lie in the depths of Zorn? What is there more to unearth about Hextech and the relics that come along with that? What more can that magic do? What more can Shimmer do? What are its capabilities? We've seen it do some crazy things across the course of the show. We see Victor's powers towards the end of Season 2, where he can essentially just like, I think the word I'm looking for is like assimilate people under his control, cure all their illnesses. What are the implications of that? And I think finally the last one amongst those of campaign styles you could do could be definitely be like a more political drama. So navigating Piltover's political landscape, trying to broker peace between factions, and that can run the lines of all the others as well, all the other campaign styles. Number 7 is a pretty straightforward one from my notes here. It's a familiar yet very unique aesthetic. I am just trying to think of myself putting my DM hat on, as it were, for the moment. Arcane's visual style is just very pleasing, very striking, and very easily evocative. It's such a fantastic art style and how they've animated it. Now, typically when I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons, in my head, I'm imagining something realistic, rendered in Unreal Engine, you might say, in my imagination. But with Arcane, you could describe things in a slightly different way. Now, I haven't given this much thought up until just writing this, but the way you describe things, you could take a few more liberties with it. Explain it in the art style of Arcane. As hard as that would be, I'm not sure how I would do that. I'm going to have to probably get some practice in. But the aesthetic generally is like steampunk meets cyberpunk meets high fantasy. It's kind of a cross between all of those things. So it's very easily, I guess, transferable to a tabletop RPG, especially a high fantasy set one. I think the reason the world works so well is just because it has the technology, it has magic, it has also gritty realism, like a very human element to it. The characters are so well written, and you're really going to want to harp on that when you try to run a game in this world. You want likable and, I guess, despisable characters at the same time. I think you won't need to explain this world really to anybody that's familiar with any kind of fantasy setting. You'll just go, this is where magic's at. These are kind of the limitations of it at the moment. And there's no learning curve there, right? If anyone's played a tabletop RPG before, they'll just be like, oh, okay, I can mix this ability and make it relevant. Number 8, finally, is basically this is an expanding world. All we've seen from Arcane, I guess the wider League of Legends universe, is Piltover and Zorn. That's all that's been covered in the show. So there's a lot of lore beyond that. I've done a bit of reading into some of the characters of League of Legends, and there is a lot to cover. Right at the end of Season 2, we see the potential that Jinx may have survived her fall and she's flown away on an airship to another land. Maybe you just explore that. Or we look at when the Raven appears to be looking for remnants of the hex tech that we see at the top of the tower at the end of Season 2 as well. I've since come to know that I think that Raven is a servant of either Swain or Realm. Swain essentially is the leader of the Noxian Empire. So Swain is a character we haven't been introduced to yet, but I was doing a bit of research, like I mentioned. Swain, and he has a demonic arm. So perhaps you could explore immediately after Season 2 what comes next for that. You can make it up yourself. That's the wonders of running a tabletop RPG. But essentially, without rambling anymore, what I'm trying to say is the options are limitless. The world is huge. If you play League of Legends, just introduce your favorite hero. Find out where they're from. Figure out how to pop it in and make them the villain, or I guess the best friend of the party, whatever you want to do. Or, yeah, that's it. That's what I'm trying to say. It's an expanding world, but there's a lot already in just Piltover and Zorn that I feel like we haven't discovered, we haven't seen in the show. Final thoughts here, just wrapping up. Arcane, the universe, I mean, to me, hugely inspiring. One of the cities in my current D&D campaign was kind of designed to be quite similar to Piltover and Zorn, but with much less detail than I would if I was just set an entire campaign in a city like that. So already you can see its influence on me. I'm just really excited to dive into it further. Arcane as a whole, it offers really rich lore. You've got a bunch of stuff to pull from with just the backlog of League of Legends stuff that you can go in and read and pull from. There's diverse factions already established in Piltover and Zorn specifically, and other kind of empires that exist, other regions of the world. I think whether your players are engineers inventing like game-changing devices, homebrewing their own things, which I would definitely encourage if they're playing that kind of character. Whether they are a rebel fighting against oppression against Piltover, depending on when it's set in the timeline, or just people caught in the crossfire if they're enforcers, highborn. I just think Arcane has an amazing opportunity to be an immersive and really dynamic, playground, I guess, for really compelling collaborative storytelling. I hope all that makes sense. I hope this maybe inspired you a little bit. That is the end of the video for now. If you did enjoy it, please leave a like and a comment with any ideas you have, and keep an eye out, because there is a very good chance that you'll see on the channel soon. I really wanted to do it for a while. Actually going to record me and my friends playing. I'm pretty sure we're going to lean into the Dagger Heart game system from Critical Role and Darrington Press, and we're going to try perhaps a very short campaign, or maybe a 1, 2, 3 shot set in the world of Piltover and Zorn, and we'll just see how it goes. I've never played the game system either, so I'm really keen to play that. For now, have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. If I don't see you again before then, I'm trying to do a video a week, just FYI. But yeah, Merry Christmas. I'll see you all in the next one. This has been Nathrandir's Guide to Everything. Bye-bye.